conversations are led around, take place around these problems, and hence more action is taken too. For this yet another conversation today, I am Sukhada, and I would be your host for today. At SKI, in the education practice area, I lead the work that we do in the foundational literacy and numeracy track. And I'm extremely privileged to have with me Deepika from EkStep. Deepika is the Chief for Policy and Partnerships at EkStep. But Deepika's journey has always inspired me. The conversations with her have always been amazing. Her work, her actions are rooted in social justice. She's a law professional by training. Before EkStep, she has spent more than 5 years working as a law and policy advisor for Aadhaar. Her work has always also been in women's justice and human rights movements across the globe as well. Apart from that, she has worked as an independent consultant across areas of gender and human rights. Thank you so much, Deepika, for joining us today.
Thank you, Sukhada, for inviting me to kind of participate in this conversation. I'm really looking forward to the 1 hour we will spend together, and particularly on something which is really very close to our heart at EkStep, and a space which needs attention, our energy, perhaps almost our societal energy, as it were, to work for the youngest amongst us. So thank you really for including me.
Absolutely. Picking up that word energy here, Deepika, and taking this conversation ahead. So as I mentioned earlier, at SKI, we pick problems, we pick white spaces, which are very critical. And here in education, one of the things that has been a persistent problem is the gap of foundational literacy and numeracy. If we could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, and within further on. Yeah. Foundational literacy and numeracy has been a persistent problem for over 2 decades now, more than that. The 90s movement in education worked a lot on, getting the universal enrollments in place, getting children to school. But what followed later was the problem of quality education. And we have persistently seen through reports like ASSER, National Achievement Survey, that the levels have not changed. Almost 50% of grade 5 children not able to read grade 2 text. And COVID only exacerbated these issues. It showed us that the problem of inequity and the learning crisis was huge, and it just multiplied it further. While we have been looking at the entire FLN landscape and analyzing it, one of the things that we understood was the fact that investments have happened in multiple areas. Investments have happened in multiple classroom factors, understanding students, their patterns, the multi-grade and multi-level classrooms, and how do we deal with that. Investments have also happened in teacher trainings to a large extent, be it government funding or through the money that comes through philanthropy. A lot of investments have happened in teacher training, governance as well. But parent engagement was one such area which has not received the much needed attention. Be it through investments or through the overall efforts in programming. And hence this was considered, we felt that it's extremely important to work in this space. On one hand, where we looked, where we were seeing that there are no investments, on the other hand, we also saw that the policy landscape was pretty, it has been really positive. If we can move to the next slide, please. Right from the right to education to the multiple policies that came in, and if we could just have a view of all the policies right away, it was right to education that talked about the role of SMCs. It brought in structures that got parents together. They could participate in the entire functioning of the school, in developing the school development plan, etc. To the National Early Childhood Policy that was launched. Where it was called out that it is important as an objective to work with parents. To, of course, the 2020 National Education Policy, and of course, the Nipun Bharat directives, where, different ways in which parents could involve was clearly articulated. And of course, all of this was concretized through the national curricular framework, wherein the importance of building strong parent-teacher relationships has also been seen. So this is a great inflection point for us in India, where the policy is extremely supportive, and how more we can build on this policy is the next question to work around. And that's where we started working on a perspective on the role of parent engagement for accelerating, for helping India achieve foundational literacy and numeracy. Some of you may have read this perspective, but if you haven't, please scan the QR code that is coming up on your slide. You can take a look, skim through the perspective. In today's webinar, we will be talking about some of the key things that we learned through this research that we did, as well as build it further along with Deepika, where we talk more about, how do we actually mainstream parent engagement. I'm just giving a minute more for people to also scan this. And on chat, Harshita has also put up the link of the perspective, so you can also take a look at the link there. Perfect. Sure. Let's move on to the next slide. Two key things that stood out for us through the research that we did, and we were very, very thankful that this was a combination of a secondary and primary research that we could carry out. Organizations like Pratham, Sanjha, Key Education Foundation, Simple Education Foundation, Makala Jagriti, Rocket Learning, and the Delhi government participated in the qualitative interviews that we did. And the factors that really stood out were that there are systemic challenges and some of the individual challenges which are impeding parents from participating. When we called them out as individual factors, what we basically meant was these are challenges that were rooted in the social identities of the parents. That could be lack of awareness about the importance of the stage at which the child is, what is happening to the child in that stage, etc. Or the general lack of confidence because the parent himself or herself has not been educated. The lack of awareness, the low educational levels, or also the circle of social problems that the parents are fixed in. For example, in a lot of states in India, we still see child marriage leading to young mothers and fathers, and hence the issues that they face because they are in this condition. So there were these problems rooted in their in the social settings that they were set in, and plus there have been some systemic factors as well. These systemic factors were called out very strongly by a lot of our participants, wherein they said that India-specific research nahi hai around parent engagement. We really need data. We need data on, what is happening when you engage parents. Impact studies are needed. And at the same time, we also need systems and infrastructure for supporting parents. And most importantly, the low budget allocations that comes into these this area. In order to, on one hand, we were capturing the challenges, and on the other hand, we also looked at the range of interventions that these organizations were working on. And we could see that these interventions broadly fell into three categories. One, they worked on really instilling confidence in parents, helping them understand that they can help, they are important, they are critical in the process. Two, these interventions really worked on increasing the awareness in parents, helping them understand what's happening, where they can help, be it awareness about their rights or the awareness about what needs to be done with children. And three, interventions that really help them with concrete strategies. They could be learning material, or they could be groups, in either ways, things that could help parents actually act. Today, we'd like to take this conversation forward, as I mentioned earlier. And hence, as the agenda for today's discussion, we want to first start our conversation with Deepika on how are we looking at parent engagement, and do we really need to rethink the way we are looking at parents? Two, we would love to talk about, like, considering Deepika's background of law and, policy making, participating in major policy making. We would love to understand from Deepika, how is it that we could really institutionalize parent engagement? Three, we picked up this because we all felt very close to this aspect of, how do we really work around the role of fathers? And there were many conversations that we did internally while picking this up, but primarily to, talk about how that is they are one of the untapped resources. A lot of interventions right now are focusing on mothers, which is very important. But how do we really bring fathers also to the forefront? And then we would love to keep ample amount of time for questions and closing comments. So going ahead now, first, let's just quickly move on to, talking about how are we looking at parent engagement and what is the world also talking about parent engagement, especially when it comes to foundational literacy and numeracy. Yeah, if we could just go a slide further. Yeah. Even as we were looking at the existing set of research patterns, right, we looked at certain concrete definitions. For example, CDC provides a definition of parent engagement in the health context. How can parents work with schools in order to maintain the overall well-being of children? Two, there is a chunk of work that Joyce Epstein did with reference to identifying different roles that parents play, be it parenting, volunteering, learning at home, etc. And then there are well-established models by organizations like Saja, where they actually were able to articulate what are the different aspects around the child where we could engage with parents. It could be at home, it could be at classroom, it could be in the school, it could be at the community level. Deepika, would love to understand from you now, how do you look at this entire problem, entire engagement, parent engagement, and how is it that we look at it in a better way?
Thank you. I'm going to just jump right into it and acknowledge that there is, even as we say that, we're looking for evidence focused on India and all of that, there is enough knowledge and research done in the world to say parent engagement is it's the secret sauce which changes everything, right? I mean, whether it's the 0 to 3-year-old child or the 3 to 8-year-old child. And more recently in 2021, Harvard did this meta-analysis study, which studied about parent intervention programs in 120 countries. You can't come to anything conclusive, but one thing it will say, especially in low-income and middle-income countries, it changes the game. The needle moves. But in India, I mean, there are so many models, and of course, COVID has helped evolve some of them in some ways. It just became an impetus for suddenly everybody looking at parents. Policy has constantly talked about it. Our models have been diverse and varied, but COVID enabled us to kind of give it some language and give parent engagement more voice. But I want to use my time here to put a few questions for us to consider as we think of parent engagement on the table. One is, it takes various forms in Anganwadis, in private schools, in government schools, in preschools. It takes various shapes and forms. Sometimes it's a collective effort where a community gets together and mothers are raising money to redo an Anganwadi, or sometimes it's a collective effort to run a mela of some kind, even if it's a school readiness mela. And we've seen that in the context of Pratham's work. Other times it looks like parenting sessions or sessions on nutrition, a learning session for parents. And completely other times it's this one-on-one interaction between the parent and the child, which is like a learning kind of relationship, which is perhaps a lot of what our efforts have also indicated and talked about. But I really want to put a question on the table. And this is literally my lawyer brain at work, okay? When we say parent and engagement, if we look at them as two different words, what are we imagining as an ecosystem focused on the early years? What is it? What is the engagement? Is it our imagination of what the parent should do with their child? Is that the engagement? Or what is it? And let's look at the two words separately. What a parent does is parent. The parenting is what they do on a daily basis, right? And it takes various shapes and forms. And inherently, everybody is learning on a daily basis. Now, the question I want to put on the table is, so when we think and speak of parent engagement, are we considering the parent as an individual, a learner, a person? Or is it that we think of them in the context of what they do only with their children, or the effort, the things that they have to do with their child? Why I bring this up is because of this question comes from a couple of insights. which is rooted in a lot of the work, a lot of organizations you refer to in the perspective, and several others have done in the field. One is the adult gains a lot from the time spent with the child in creating, doing, playing, whatever it is. There is something an adult gains from it, which is the reason why the adult continues with it. No matter how difficult or where your situation is and what the lack of resources are, right? In some ways, this engagement transforms the adult. I want to give you two stories behind this insight.
Absolutely.
And this comes from, I mean, these are all anecdotal. I'm sure there are many stories of the 100+ people in the organizations working, and there are many grounds of stories which validate it. But I'll just give you two from my perspective, right? One is from two different meetings, one in Karnataka, one in Maharashtra, with mothers groups, where one mothers group meeting was on a word game challenge that was being sent to them on a weekly basis. And we were like, it's been sent to you now for 6 weeks, enough, no? Why do you want to do this? You've got what you want. Their response, no, give me more. And give me more because I want more time with my child to do something interesting. This gives me more ideas. In that give me more came something about how they felt about their relationship with their child and how they felt about themselves. Right? And I know that, for instance, this insight has come again, and this is in the context of even Maharashtra, where the group talked about it gives us an opportunity to do things together. And when I can't do something, I see somebody else's idea and then I do it. So there is something else going on in this group dynamic. And similarly, even on one-on-one interventions, which have happened through WhatsApp and all of these AI bots, for example, the work that KAF and Rocket and all are doing. And they'll also tell you repeatedly, and Aziz says, has chatted, the aha moment comes and says, because this is a bonding moment. It's giving us something to do together. Things that I have to find. Now, another basis for this question of the parent as the individual is coming from a little bit of qualitative research we did about a year and a half ago, just in terms of interviews with primary caregivers. So obviously, when you go looking for primary caregivers, you find mothers. That's how it happens, often enough. And when we looked at this, and there were lots of conversations we were having, and and we were trying to learn about what does it mean to be a migrant mother in Gurgaon versus an urban mother in Bangalore versus a rural mother in Jharkhand, all of that. For a second, we put aside all the demographics and said, can we just look at their personas? And what was interesting in classifying these personas, not to label people, but much more to see what characteristics are emerging, was there was a striver, there is a solution seeker, there is a struggler, and there is the solution provider, right? Okay. And each of them come with their own characteristics and behaviors. For some, a nudge works. For some, something completely pre-packaged, easy to use is what is needed because everything else is overwhelming. Another wants to be the one that is building all the solutions herself by creating the TLM materials at home. There are that. Why I bring this up is thinking a little like this about the person gives us an opportunity in the system to think of parent engagement, parents, parental programs that caters to the diversity of the human that is the parent. And even classifying this in this way, just for thinking, opened up so many conversations with organizations because suddenly it was about, hey, is my content catering to this type or that type?
Right.
Are my programs more effective with one type? Right?
Absolutely.
So it kind of opened up some of that. Lastly, I just really want to say children don't come with manuals naturally. Understanding how children grow, and particularly in the 0 to 8 age group, are in a simple way is the need of the hour. in a way that would enhance parental agency so that they can find their own solutions. And why do I say this? And this comes from a little bit of a aha thing that I'll just give an example as to why this is important. Joe Chopra from Latika Roy Foundation, they work with children with special needs, often talks about how once the child comes into the center, the whole family comes into the center because they've suddenly realized that they can all do many things at home simply to support this child. Of course, these are children with special needs, so therefore the whole family gets involved. But perhaps it's the understanding of what the need is which enables them to get engaged and find their own solutions at home. And if there was one thing to do in the engagement, maybe it's about understanding 3-4 things about how children grow in this age group. And that could drive more agency enhancing behavior among parents. It's worth considering and seeing if that works. And more importantly, this is literally my last point on this, is the mindset shift from scarcity to abundance will change the narrative. In some ways, every organization you have mentioned is doing that and attempting that with the awareness and all of that. But the mindset shift from don't have time, this is the burden, this is the only window I have, to understanding that if this is a window of opportunity, children grow the most in this way. Play is really, really good for children in this age group, and that's something we can do at home. And I have these 3-4 things. Speaking in my own language is great for the child. Even perhaps 10 or 12 things like that can be hugely enhancing for foundational literacy and numeracy, right? So in some ways, the small things I am doing to see growth, and to see growth in its completeness, would be the most critical thing. And this is a story that Smithin from Pratham will tell you. He actually wrote it in the ASA report. I don't know, I think he's here today as well. But it's one of my favorite stories. Okay. The mother walks into the Anganwadi worker and waves the child's report card, which is a visual report card. So she can't read and write, but she knows. It says that the child doesn't know how to skip. No, I know my child skips. Gives a row, child skips. He says, you change this. That is an agency enhancing behavior, right? Where you know something and you're able to take it on. Not to confront, but to say, listen, this is not how you think it is. I know. And ultimately, every child needs a champion, as Rita Pearson says, and perhaps parent is the best champion of the child. In our viewing of parent engagement, if we put the parent in the center and see how the world looks from their vantage point, does it change the lens with which we look at engagement? That's sort of the question I have.
No, this is amazing, Deepika. I think this is an aha moment for me now, because I think what you really brought out very, very strongly is the fact that while we are thinking of education programming as a whole, right? Like, are we thinking of parents as a means to an end of achieving FLN, or are we looking at parents as an end in itself? Like, how do you consider them as individuals who have unique learning styles, who have unique needs, motivations, and how do you really cater to that? How do you leverage that beauty in each parent? And the second thing, which is very, very critical for all kinds of conversations in the social space, is this point of, abundance versus the scarcity mindset. I think that's a powerful message that we would love to take forward. So thank you so much for really opening this up with these two power-packed points. Would love to, would really, I can see that there's a lot of action on the chat already, and Harshita from our team is already collating your questions. We will be taking these questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes that we have for Q&A. But do keep pouring your questions at the end of every section so that, they're fresh and they're all out there. We'd love to now move to the next section, which is how do you actually institutionalize parent engagement? And here, Deepika, we have 3 questions for you. One, basis your experience as a law professional, right? Like, how do you see the journey of institutionalizing parent engagement? Two, if you could back this up with really bringing up what are the different pathways? Are there a few examples that you have seen on the field through the work that EkStep has done? And three, we have heard so much about the Sunbird platform that EkStep has, and you have been working with multiple people in the EdTech solution landscape. So would love to also understand the role of technology, the role that technology can play in this institutionalization. You can pick any and start with any, but this is the broad exploration that we want here.
Okay, let's start with the idea of institutionalizing something. If you close your eyes and were to imagine what institutionalization means to you, I can bet my money that you think of it as something that emits from a policy framework where government has to put money in it and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm offering a framework to think about this. Okay. Law and policy gives permissions for things. It puts an idea out there. So, for example, saying that there should be school management committees or Anganwadi samitis are one institutional mechanism. It's creating the space for a type of institutional mechanism, right? And that has a role to play. They will define what it is meant to do, and it is a structure. That's one type of institutionalizing. But that type of institutionalizing does one job, which is it involves the larger community to represent diverse voices and reduces the distance between the learning space, whether it's an Anganwadi or school, and the parent community and the larger community. It does that. So then it becomes about what's its intention, what's its agenda, how was it function, is it doing its job, right? That's the job. But what if we look at institutionalization saying permissions that policies give us? And in your trajectory, in the second or third slide, you put a list of things from over a decade ago, where conversations at the policy level have been ignited on parental engagement, role of parent. And more recently in the NEP and the NCF foundational stage, you have language such as responsive parenting all being included. To my mind, when policy states it like that, even if it doesn't say how it is to be done, it is given permission. It's institutionalized. Institutionalization doesn't only mean structure. It means an opening for creation of ideas, programs, and structures. So I kind of want to use this in its broadest sense possible, right? The job of policy is to give license and permissions, and it has done that. So the question is, what are we going to do as an ecosystem to run with it, right? Learning spaces can be enablers instead of this institutionalization by creating the space and the rhythm for that engagement. Schools schools are great rhythm creators, between assemblies and timetables and lunches and all of it. Extremely good at rhythms, PTM meetings and all of that kind of stuff. Bringing the parent into the space and engaging with them is an opening, is possible. And you have examples of that, whether it's school readiness melas that Pratham does, or all of Sanja's work in Delhi particularly, right? Where it's because the school system has said, come and you do this stuff. You carry this for us. So I see this in this kind of broadest sense, where there is an angle where collective and community movements also are a way of institutionalizing parent engagement. Volunteering is institutionalizing. Volunteering to solve problems. Like, for example, this particular story there are many like this, but in a Sanwa block in Jharkhand, where this particular Anganwadi did not have anything, the women got together, raised money from the village and refurbished it practically themselves. So that's an institutional mechanism of engagement without somebody telling them they had to do it. So in that sense, I would look at this as a framework of school to parent community with structures such as SMCs and Anganwadi Samitis, schools to subset of parents where it can become learning sessions. Learning sessions also are structures. You create a workshop on something, you bring them in for something, all of those kinds of things. That's also an institutional example. The space where the one-to-one space where the conversation about your child, their growth with the teacher through the PTMs, that's definitely one. But can that be enhanced to be less intimidating? Can there be a holistic way of seeing the growth of the child? Could we institutionalize the idea that PTMs are more than just this report-giving idea? Can it be about seeing overall growth of a community? There have been very interesting ideas for example, that the melas at the panchayat for math learning in Karnataka that Akshara has been doing with their Ganita Kalike Andolan, right? When it's happened once, it's happened the second year, it's happened the third year, the panchayat has got involved, now that's institutionalized, right? And it's a community thing. That's where all parents are involved. They're seeing their children as a whole rather than one or two, right? The other thing which I feel also is expanding spaces for children is important. Spaces, if you think of learning spaces, you either think school, Anganwadi, preschool, private school, whatever. What about parks and libraries? You can create other spaces which are safe, welcoming spaces for children. And I'll give you an example of public libraries in Karnataka, where Adhyayan is working on the Librarians of Karnataka program with a read aloud programs that they're doing. From the first meeting of librarians who saw themselves as administrators of a library, to after 3 sessions where they learned how to read a story and conduct sessions in the librarian is now a community member telling stories. Mothers and fathers are engaging by bringing their children into a public library. That's another institutional mechanism. So I would say for the children, particularly in the 0 to 8 age group or even the 3 to 8 age group, expanding spaces for engagement using all the possible levers, whether it's a public library, would even be a community library, or the school space, any rhythm that has found space, any new rhythm that has found space is institutionalization. And that support for that can come from government, outside government, from anywhere. But that's essentially how I would like to leverage it, because policy has given permission. Now we have to just imagine and make it happen. So that's how I see it.
No, I think this is so helpful. I'd love to pause, reflect on a lot of points that you made. I think they answered the first 2 questions beautifully, especially the range of examples that you gave in the ways in which people are, converting the policy into practice. I think those are very, very crucial. Also, a key takeaway is to, use structures of all kinds to do this. So the range that you called out from already existing structures of schools to actually parks, I think that range is an important one to keep in mind. So thank you so much, Deepika, for that. Would love to hear about technology. Sorry, please go ahead.
No,
yeah, go ahead.
I can jump into the tech space question. Yes. Tech is an enabler of access. It can be hugely empowering and agency giving if it fits in the right way. It can also be a tool for equity, particularly when you're looking at under-resourced environments or inclusion and all of these other things. It can be all of that. Now, I want to limit my comments to very specific parent engagement type tech things rather than going sort of the large-scale conversation around tech. Yeah. Between WhatsApp messages, which are going to parents with nudges and ideas and things they can do, WhatsApp-based AI bots, YouTube, which is the universal source of all things for all people, And needless to say, COVID, which did open up the minds of all of ours collective imagination to leveraging tech. And things, particularly in India, with open source materials available in a Diksha or a Story Weaver or Pratham Open School or a range of these other things, and more recently with the launch of the Honest network to enable better access. There's a lot of possibilities, lots and lots of possibilities, right? There is space for aids for parents. One example I want to give is the Balsaki AI-based solution that Pratham has developed for mothers and who had questions about the growth of their children from the 0 to 3 year age group. It's AI-based, so it's kind of answering a set of questions in a way that is accessible to them in multiple languages. Those IVRS messages, you have a range of solutions. Of course, there's rockets, WhatsApp-based nudges and activities for parents to do, and there's also KEF's CLAP program. Pratham has a range of things in their kitty, right down to the Kahani Train thing, where they kept sending stories one a week. I think on the supply side, we have a lot of diverse ideas and an ecosystem which is actually quite thriving. If the learnings and insights from this could become a public good, it would just sharpen how we would leverage technology to deliver what's needed faster, in a way that there is a diversity of options available for parents. I mean, imagine a world that you can find simple things that they need. I mean, like, how does my child grow? When are they supposed to grow their teeth? When is she supposed to crawl? Or should I be expecting my 3-year-old and a 4-year-old to write with a pencil? And just knowing basic things like that in a simple way is extremely useful. And now I want to pause here and say, this is not an India problem. World over, even today you read books on parenting and growth of children in English, and they keep coming out. So this is just something that needs to be packaged in a simple way for a large community of parents in India. You want stories in your local language, word games in your local language, simple riddles and puzzles in a language where you can engage, math games, and perhaps a safe way to see a holistic growth of your child. I keep coming back to this idea of the safe way to see it, because this issue of judgment and comparison keeps coming up, right? And that can be quite damaging to children. So in some ways, if we can put our creative energy into creating a diversity of ways of seeing growth, tech enables access. Tech can, especially with AI and all that possibilities with correct boundaries, can enable a lot. But can we create the right habits and engagement is really the challenge that I think would be interesting to unpack over the next few years. We have the platforms, we have the digital public infrastructure ready for it as a country. And we have a diverse ecosystem which is already doing a lot of interesting solutions. If we can somehow get the demand ecosystem and the supply ecosystem to meet in a way where parents are seen for who they are as persons and to cater to their needs, I think we may be onto something here, rather than pushing solutions.
That's amazing. And I think we're still carrying that thread of understanding parents as learners while we are, talking about this. The beauty of this conversation, I think, Deepika, is also the whole point of bottom-up solution making that you're bringing in this conversation. I do remember a conversation that we had with Dost Foundation at some point, and they also cater to a lot of general problems, like questions that parents have. So there is a bunch of solutions that already exist. And I remember in one of our early conversations, you also spoke about how we also need to talk to each other to share these solutions so that we don't reinvent things that we are already acing. Taking these learnings forward, I think a great set of messages that we have for institutionalization, utilizing the existing structures really well, creating newer structures, being creative while doing that, learning from each other, and considering the parent at the center is something that we carry forward, Deepika. For the next section on the role of fathers, we actually have a question for the audience, and we'd love the audience to share their responses on chat. Different ways of asking the same question. We basically want to understand your reactions to why should we engage with fathers? Why should we talk about fathers? And why should we really think differently about engaging fathers? If you could just take 2 minutes to respond to this question on chat, and then Deepika will take it over from there. Please share your views on chat. Amazing responses coming up, Deepika. People are saying that, they are the decision makers of the house. They influence a lot of, they have a lot more agency. Because we need them as an extra person who's taking responsibility. Also because they're responsible for raising their children, of course. Yes. Yeah. They're bonding with their parents, with their children. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. We'll give it another minute. Please share your thoughts, views of why should we consider fathers. Yeah, Harsha, our participant, is also saying that we need to really break the cycle and, challenge the gender roles, break the gender gap. And Shahzada is also saying the other aspect of it, where it's highlighted that mother is the primary caregiver and usually talk about her. So we would love for you, Deepika, now to, really take this forward and respond to this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it's the reason why this question is so interesting to me, and this is something that we started looking at about again when we started this work about a year and a half ago, was to say, can we look, when we say parents, we say parent, but often enough only think of mother, right? And a lot of our programming effort and thinking effort goes there. I said, can we talk to fathers and see what happens? I mean, like, what do they think? What is their imagination of life and their engagement with their children in this age group, right? And it was such a revealing conversation. And this is something that we did just because we wanted to learn, and we put it out there, conversations about 140 plus fathers across the country and diverse backgrounds. A lot of what the comments are saying is also true. Decision makers, role models, need for carrying birth, sharing the responsibility and all of that. But what I think is one very, very interesting thing, which I don't think any of us were prepared for when we did the conversation, was how fathers talked, and this is ubiquitous, urban, rural, diverse backgrounds. Fathers said the joy they got from the engagement with their children. They talked about joy and they talked about play. It was one other interesting fact was a lot of urban fathers said that the decision making on education was mothers. I go with what she says. But it was a little bit more varied in the rural, sort of semi-rural setting. But this space, open space, which I thought was just like right there for the taking, was a permission to engage in lightness and play was a space that the father had with the child. And in some ways, in all our conversations with mothers, play doesn't feature. And perhaps it plays to the question in my mind when I was listening to these anecdotes, conversations, and research findings were, stereotype plays out in a very interesting way, right? You actually don't see adult women play in homes or in public spaces that much in India. And in some ways, that's showing up in the way the mother engages with the child. But in some ways, the father is enabling that. So I think we have to view them separately, at least because it opens up spaces in our minds from a programmatic perspective, engagement perspective, interest, bridging the gender gap, all of the comments that were being made, all of that. And giving them also small little things and think, okay, your job is to get play done, maybe, and that enables learning. Another question we asked fathers, I remember through this whole thing, was also whether they saw play as learning, and they didn't actually. The disconnect between play and learning was was there. They didn't see that as learning. They saw that it's something you do when you take a break from learning. So I think this is another wide open space for all of the reasons that have been stated in the chat, but also another opportunity to introduce holistic learning, opening minds up, fun things to do. That's also learning, that kind of stuff. There's an opportunity, and of course, the reason with this responsibility, shouldering. And once you're engaged as a person, you will find other ways to engage. So yeah. This is a no-brainer. I think this has to happen. And I'm also asking, and I'm wondering whether, Sukhada, is conversations with organizations that work with men and boys, whether that might be of value to the ecosystem that works in early years and the foundational stage, to see if there is something they can borrow from each other, or also even seed on the other side. Because this has to be one of those intergenerational sustainable changes, right? So maybe some spaces where this collaborative thinking can open up spaces for different conversation.
Absolutely, 100%, Deepika. And I think this last point that you made on, unique organizations working with men and fathers, men in general, and people working in the FLN space, talking to each other, sharing, etc. But one of the things I think Akriti from SCF just put up a comment about, patriarchy. And one of the questions that is also asked is, while you're working with fathers, are you maintaining the status quo? Are you actually building on the existing gender roles and engaging with them? Or are you challenging the norms and, further engaging them? So are you also working on the gender roles while you're engaging fathers? So that's a tough one to deal with, but would love to hear what you think about it. How do you tackle the shifting of gender roles in general while we are working with fathers?
I think it's really about what spaces become available and what conversation that one needs to have. Right? I mean, at EkStep, this was just a trigger for thinking, to open up the conversation, which then in our conversation, we said, okay, let's put the father on the table. Let's see what happens. But it's an opportunity, and it's about how much of a relationship you have in that community, what space it's enabling, what nudges you want to make. In fact, even on content, for instance, more recently, I know a lot of organizations, particularly Pratham and Dost and all of that, are looking at their content from the gender lens, right? To review content from a gender lens. So then you are actually also bringing that conversation into the loop. I think this is an opportunity to try and see where it goes.
Absolutely. I think that's an important point as well. I mean, integrating gender in different sections of the programming, be it content, be it pedagogy, be it different kinds of practices while we are thinking about this. Thank you. Thank you so much, Deepika. I think you've already answered a couple of our questions, which are coming up on the next slide. But would love to now, open this entire forum for questions from the audience. And we'll just pause here to, hear from Harshita. Harshita, if you can just, we have 7 minutes. So some of the important questions that have come through the chat, if you can just bring them up for Deepika.
Sure, Sukhada. I think everyone wanted to circle back to a very interesting point that came up in the beginning about rethinking parent engagement. So there's an interesting question that comes that mindset shifts from scarcity to abundance. And there was a question about request for dilating on what this implies essentially. So I'll just hand out.
I think when we say scarcity to abundance, it's much more recognizing what you have within and around you. And that's quite a lot in terms of engaging to do the job you're doing, right? It's otherwise if we say, I don't know how to do it, I don't know, I don't have this, I need these resources. This is this constant, I don't have time. My life is like this. But how do you shift that lens to say, wait, you're already actually doing a lot of these things. And you have to do just simple things, have a conversation, read a story together, or listen to something together. So can the way we look at the effort that the parent needs to put from the abundance of what they're already in their environment and what they're already doing, and to just build on that, and there's a lot, there's a lot that every parent does on a daily basis. Okay. And you don't need a ton more, particularly for this age group, to be able to get the results that we want. You may need a little bit more, some may need a little bit more help, but mindset wise, shifting from I don't have to what I've got is enough to get me there. And doing this and also seeing that sort of as a growth for themselves and not just visualizing it as the growth for the child. So these are sort of abundance mindset parameters that I think we could try and build into programs, build into messages.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that, Deepika. Any other questions, Harshita?
Something just came up, Sukhada. So there's a question around how do we look into parent community engagement from an M&E perspective? And this person is asking from a very policy and government oriented ecosystem. So just passing that on.
Sure. Over to you, Deepika.
Do you want to take one or two more so I can just kind of
Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah.
Time also. Yeah.
I'll just take a minute to summarize everything, so then just get back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, how do you encourage funding for interventions on parent engagement is clearly one. Till Harshita also summarizes the earlier list.
Both the M&E question and the funding question are in some ways fully tied.
Absolutely. And also assessments, right? Like how do we how best we can pin down the outcomes in children that are directly related to responsive caregiving? Like how do you really club responsive caregiving by showing outcomes? How do you, again, the M&E perspective here?
Okay, I'm going to be a bit of an outlier here, okay? And perhaps say something which is not necessarily very popular. We have to. I'm not an expert in M&E. I'm not an expert in assessments. Neither of these are my field of areas. I know that they have a role to play in order for us to look at growth, change, and all of that. Sticking to the idea of parent engagement, the point I'm really trying to push for is to say, I think for learning outcomes to happen, there are many different factors at play, and this will be one of them. Responsive parenting, engagement of parents is one of the factors that will help. It's by far not the only. Having said that, what if we were to flip this to say, instead of linking it directly to learning outcome of the child, can we look at changing behaviors and habits in the engagement of parent? in terms of mindset shift and ideas that they're willing to accept. More conversations, we're doing more word games, we're doing this at home. And there are only a bunch of things that you're doing. Can you measure that in terms of more storytelling, more conversations, a bunch of things around math, all of these kinds of things? That engagement, for that engagement and the value of that engagement, if we can figure out a way to do that by not calling it assessment. If anything, this may be about the growth of the parent, from where they were to what they're doing differently, and perhaps not put the pressure and the thing on direct result as far as the learning outcome of the child. That's a much more complex issue. This is a factor for sure. If it was not there, it may be different, but when it is there, it tilts the balance in the favor of a better outcome. So then you don't put a ton of weight on this. Because this is not the only factor, but it is an important one. So that's my sort of view on sort of packaging this whole thing slightly differently. I don't know if it answers the question you were looking for, but I can see how you might ask that from the perspective of how do you get more funding for it? How do you get more all of that? But maybe just the case of better parent engagement is better for the child and all learners. And in case if it takes a village to bring up a child, only the teacher or the Anganwadi worker is not sufficient. Maybe that use case is sufficient to get more funding in for types of parent programs that we're looking for. I'm making the case that should be sufficient.
No, but I think what you highlighted earlier, right? Like, I think what is it that we are capturing is also equally important. Like, are we capturing the right thing when we are talking about parent engagement, the habits that you spoke about, the different small things that parents are doing? Maybe we are not. And that is something to be definitely looked at. We're almost out of time now. But Harshita, in one last question, if there is any, we can take that and maybe then we can pause for the day.
Sure, I think everything has been covered, Sukhada, but just one last thing that came up is that parent engagement. So there was an interesting question that we only see parent engagement in terms of educational goals, but other things that happen outside it, but still have an implicit impact on learning and educational outcomes is a limitedly done discussion. So is that something you want to take up?
Sure. It's a statement in itself, Deepika, but love to hear your reflections. Yeah.
I think that could not have better summed up this entire discussion in some way. You put the parent in the middle and see the world from the parent's vantage point. This is not about just one thing. It's about a bunch of other things. And this is what you will hear even when you talk about the mothers groups, right? They talk about how coming out and doing this is they are learning other things. And many programs which are talking to parents are doing other things for them, which is not only related to the parenting issue, right? Building skills on some things, how to use technology, okay? The skilling up component of it, I'm just giving you these examples, but there's also issues related to violence and, all of those kinds of things. Anyone who works in communities will have to engage with these issues, and they do that in their own way. I'm not saying everyone has to solve for it, but solve for everything. But if you put the parent in the middle, then you will start touching on all of these topics in some way, shape, or form. So it becomes about parenting and who you are.
Taking that strong message of keeping them in the center today, Deepika. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for all the amazing conversation. Thank you to this lovely audience for all the things that you shared, your reflections, your questions. For looking at more and following about what SKI Education Practice Area is doing, please do scan the QR code. You can also visit us on the SKI website, where you will look at work from the education practice area as well as other 6 practice areas. And we'll keep communicating with you. For any more information, do write to us as well. Thank you so much, Deepika.
Thank you for inviting me to this conversation. I had a great fun doing this with you, and certainly it's been a fun thing to do. Thank you so much.